The church doors stood open like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. Inside, 200 people filled the pews, ranchers, politicians, rivals forced into temporary peace by the promise of a wedding that would unite empires. But the bride was gone, vanished. And in her place stood Eliza Harper, trembling in a borrowed dress 3 sizes too large, cinched desperately at the waist with sewing pins that pricked her skin with every breath. Her father's hand crushed her shoulder. The groom's face was stone, and when the preacher asked if anyone objected, the silence was so thick it could choke you. If you're watching from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it grabs you, hit that like button. You're going to want to see how this ends. The morning had started with a lie. Eliza woke before dawn to the sound of boots on gravel and her father's voice rising in panic outside her window. She pushed aside the thin quilt and pressed her face to the cold glass, squinting into the blue dark Texas morning. Her father stood in the yard, hatless, his shirt half tucked, speaking in sharp bursts to their ranch foreman. Even from the second floor she could see the rigid line of his shoulders, the way his hands gestured wildly, movements he only made when something had gone terribly wrong. She dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling over the buttons of her plain cotton dress. The house was too quiet. Her mother's door was still closed. Her sister's door. Eliza stopped in the hallway. The door to Charlotte's room hung open, not just ajar, wide open, the kind of open that announced absence. She stepped inside. The room was pristine. Too pristine. The bed was made with military precision, the pillows fluffed and arranged, the vanity cleared of the usual clutter of perfume bottles and ribbons. The wardrobe stood open, and half the dresses were gone. The good ones, the silk and the satin, the ones Charlotte saved for special occasions. Eliza's stomach dropped. On the pillow sat a single envelope, cream-colored and sealed with wax. Her name was written across the front in Charlotte's looping, careless script. She didn't want to open it, but she did. Eliza, I couldn't do it. I know you'll understand because you always understand. He's everything Father wanted and nothing I could ever love. I've gone with someone who makes me feel alive. Don't hate me. You're stronger than I ever was. See. Eliza read it 3 times, her hands shaking harder with each pass. Then she folded it carefully, slipped it into her pocket, and walked downstairs. Her father was in the parlor, pacing like a caged animal. Her mother sat rigid in the wing-back chair, her face pale and bloodless. When Eliza entered, they both turned to her with identical expressions of desperation. She's gone, her father said flatly. I know. She left with him, that drifter, the one who worked the Dixon spread for 2 weeks before they ran him off for gambling. His voice cracked. Today of all days, today. Eliza said nothing. There was nothing to say. Her mother's hands twisted in her lap. The wards will be at the church in 3 hours. Everyone will be there. The governor, the land commissioner, half the state legislature. Her voice was barely a whisper. If we don't produce a bride, we're finished. Finished? Eliza repeated. Her father stopped pacing. His face was gray. The ranch, Eliza. We mortgaged it to pay for this wedding, to prove to the wards that we're their equals, that this alliance is worth their time. He exhaled through his teeth. If there's no marriage, there's no alliance. And if there's no alliance, the bank forecloses in 30 days. Eliza felt the air leave her lungs. You knew, she said slowly. You knew we were that close to losing everything, and you bet it all on Charlotte marrying a man she's never loved. It was a good match, her father shouted. Caleb Ward is a decent man. He would have treated her well. She would have had everything except a choice. Her mother flinched. Her father's jaw worked, but no sound came out. Eliza looked at them both. These people who had raised her in Charlotte's shadow, who had poured every hope and every dollar into their beautiful, charming eldest daughter, who had never once asked Eliza what she wanted or needed or dreamed about. And she felt something harden in her chest. What do you want me to do? She asked. Her father's eyes met hers, and in them she saw the answer before he spoke it. Come to the church, he said quietly. We'll figure something out. Sat. The First Methodist Church of Ashford stood at the center of town like a white sentinel, its steeple cutting into the pale morning sky. By the time the Harper family arrived, carriages already lined the street. Women in feathered hats and men in dark suits clustered on the steps, their voices low and speculative. They turned as the Harpers approached, and Eliza felt their eyes crawl over her like ants. She had changed into her Sunday dress, a plain gray thing with a high collar and long sleeves. It was clean and neat and utterly forgettable. Next to Charlotte, she had always looked like a shadow. Today, she looked like a ghost. Inside, the church was breathtaking. White roses and ivy draped every pew. Candles flickered in tall brass stands. The scent of orange blossom hung thick in the air. It was a ceremony designed to announce wealth, power, and permanence. And the groom stood at the altar, waiting. Caleb Ward was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit that fit him like it had been made for this exact moment. His dark hair was combed back, his jaw clean-shaven. He stood with his hands clasped in front of him, his expression carefully neutral. But even from the back of the church, Eliza could see the tension in his posture, the way his gaze kept drifting to the empty aisle. Beside him stood his father. Jonathan Ward was a legend in Texas, a man who had built an empire from dust and blood, who controlled more land than some counties, who had the governor's personal phone number. He was shorter than his son, but twice as imposing, with steel gray hair and eyes like flint. He stood with his arms crossed, surveying the crowd with the satisfaction of a man who knew he had won, until he realized the bride was missing. The murmurs started at the front and rippled backward. Heads turned. Whispers grew louder. Eliza watched as Caleb's expression shifted from confusion to concern to something darker. Jonathan Ward's face turned to stone. The preacher, a nervous man with a thin mustache, stepped forward and spoke quietly to Caleb. Caleb's jaw tightened. He shook his head once, sharply. The preacher tried again. This time Caleb turned and looked directly at Eliza's father, who stood frozen at the back of the church. The crowd fell silent. Jonathan Ward descended from the altar and walked down the aisle with slow, deliberate steps. He stopped in front of Eliza's father and spoke in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Where is she?" Eliza's father opened his mouth, but no words came out. "Where?" Jonathan repeated. "Is my son's bride? She's not coming," her father stammered. The crowd erupted. Gasps, shouts. A woman near the front actually stood up, her hand pressed to her chest. Jonathan Ward didn't move. He simply stared at Eliza's father with an expression of such cold fury that Eliza felt her knees go weak. "You wasted my time," Jonathan said quietly. "You wasted my son's time. You made a promise, and you broke it." He stepped closer. "I will ruin you for this." "Please," her father began. "No." Jonathan's voice cut like a blade. "You're done. I'll see to it personally. You'll lose the ranch, the cattle, everything. And I'll make sure everyone in this state knows what kind of man you are." Eliza's mother made a small, broken sound, and then Eliza heard herself speak. "I'll marry him." Every head in the church turned toward her. The silence was absolute. Jonathan Ward's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" Eliza stepped forward, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. "I'll marry him. Your son. I'll take Charlotte's place." Her father grabbed her arm. "Eliza, no. You said we needed a bride," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "Here I am." Jonathan looked her up and down with open disdain. "You?" "Yes. You're not even pretty." The words landed like a slap, but Eliza didn't flinch. She had heard worse. She had spent her entire life hearing worse. "No," she agreed. "I'm not. But I'm here, and I'm willing." Jonathan turned to Caleb, who had come down from the altar and now stood a few feet away, staring at Eliza like he'd never seen her before. "What do you say?" Jonathan demanded. "Will you marry this girl?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He studied Eliza, really studied her. His gaze moved over her face, her shoulders, her hands clenched at her sides. She forced herself to meet his eyes, to hold his stare even though every instinct screamed at her to look away. "Do you even know my name?" he asked quietly. "Caleb," she said. "Caleb Ward." "And you know what this means, what you'd be agreeing to." "I know." He was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to his father. "I'll marry her." Jonathan's expression darkened. "Are you out of your mind? You wanted an alliance, Caleb said evenly. You wanted this wedding to go forward. Here's your bride. This is not what we agreed to. No, Caleb interrupted. It's not, but it's what's happening. Father and son stared at each other, and Eliza saw something pass between them, some old, unspoken battle that had nothing to do with her. Finally, Jonathan stepped back. Fine, he said coldly. Marry her, but don't come crying to me when you regret it. He turned and walked back to the front of the church, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Caleb looked at Eliza. Can you be ready in 10 minutes? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Then let's get this over with. Also, the ceremony was a blur. Eliza stood at the altar in Charlotte's dress, hastily altered in a back room by 3 women she didn't know, their hands moving with ruthless efficiency as they pinned and tucked and stitched her into a gown that would never quite fit. The silk was too heavy, the lace scratched her neck. The train dragged behind her like a weight. Caleb stood beside her stiff and silent. He didn't look at her. He looked straight ahead, his jaw set, his hands clenched at his sides. The preacher spoke the words. Eliza heard them as if from a great distance. Do you, Caleb Ward, take this woman? I do. Do you, Eliza Harper, take this man? I do. Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife. No one cheered, no one clapped. The silence was suffocating. Caleb turned to her, and for one terrible moment she thought he might kiss her. But he didn't. He simply took her hand, his grip firm and impersonal, and led her down the aisle. The crowd parted for them like water. Outside, a carriage waited. Caleb helped her inside without a word, then climbed in beside her. The driver snapped the reins, and they lurched forward. Eliza sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor. She could feel Caleb's presence beside her, solid, immovable, radiating tension. Thank you, she said quietly. He didn't respond. I know this isn't what you wanted. No, he said, his voice flat. It's not. She swallowed hard. I'll try not to be a burden. You're already a burden. The words were brutal in their honesty. Eliza felt them settle in her chest like stones. They rode the rest of the way in silence. The Ward Ranch sprawled across the valley like a kingdom. Thousands of acres of grassland dotted with cattle and horses, framed by distant mountains. The main house was a sprawling 2-story structure built from limestone and timber, with wide porches and tall windows that gleamed in the afternoon light. It was beautiful. It was also prepared for someone else. Eliza saw it the moment she stepped inside. The parlor was decorated with white flowers and ivory ribbons. The dining room table was set for a celebration. Upstairs, the master bedroom had been transformed into something out of a dream. Rose petals scattered across the bed, lace curtains billowing in the breeze, a bottle of champagne cooling in a silver bucket. Caleb stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. This was for her, he said. I know. He walked to the bed and began stripping it methodically. He pulled off the lace coverlet, swept the rose petals onto the floor, removed the champagne and carried it downstairs. When he came back, the room was bare and cold. You can sleep here, he said. I'll take the guest room. Caleb, don't, he said sharply. Just don't. He left, closing the door behind him. Eliza stood alone in the empty room, still wearing Charlotte's dress, and for the first time that day, she let herself cry. The days that followed were strange and silent. Caleb left before dawn and returned after dark. When they passed in the hallways, he nodded politely and kept walking. They ate meals in separate rooms. They spoke only when necessary, brief, clipped exchanges about household logistics. Eliza spent her time exploring the house. It was larger than she'd expected, with rooms that seemed to have no purpose. She found a library filled with books on ranching and law, a sitting room with a piano covered in dust, a study with a desk buried under papers. It was the study that caught her attention. The papers were financial records, ledgers, invoices, contracts. They were disorganized, chaotic, months out of date. She started reading out of curiosity, then concern, then alarm. The ranch was hemorrhaging money. Supplies were being billed twice. Contractors were overcharging. Workers were listed on the payroll who hadn't been seen in months. And no one, least of all Caleb, seemed to have noticed. Eliza sat down at the desk and began to organize. She worked through the night, cross-referencing invoices, flagging discrepancies, calculating totals. By morning, she had recovered nearly $3,000 in errors and fraudulent charges. When Caleb came downstairs, she was still at the desk, surrounded by papers. He stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing?" She looked up, exhausted. "Fixing your books." He frowned. "My books are fine." "No," she said quietly. "They're not." She handed him a single sheet of paper, a summary of what she'd found. He read it in silence. Then he read it again. His expression shifted from skepticism to disbelief to something that looked almost like respect. "You did this in one night?" "Yes." He set the paper down carefully. "Why?" "Because I'm your wife," she said simply. "And this is my home now, too." For the first time since the wedding, Caleb looked at her, really looked at her. Not with resentment or obligation, but with something that might have been gratitude. "Thank you," he said. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Fund. Over the next few weeks, a routine emerged. Eliza took over the ranch accounts entirely, streamlining processes, negotiating better contracts, and rooting out inefficiencies. She discovered a talent for numbers she hadn't known she possessed. Caleb began consulting her on financial decisions, then operational ones, then strategic ones. They started eating dinner together, not because they had to, but because it was easier to discuss the day's work over a meal. The conversations were practical at first: budgets, staffing, repairs, but slowly they began to drift into other territory. "You never wanted to marry her, did you?" Eliza asked one evening. Caleb looked up from his plate. "No." "Then why did you agree?" He was quiet for a long time. "Because my father told me to, and I've spent my whole life doing what he tells me to do." "Even when it makes you miserable?" "Especially then." He smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "He built this ranch from nothing. He made me who I am. I owe him everything." "You don't owe him your happiness." Caleb's gaze sharpened. "And what do you know about happiness?" "Not much," Eliza admitted, "but I know what it feels like to live for someone else, to disappear into what they need, and I know it's not sustainable." He studied her for a moment, then looked away. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. 3 months into the marriage, Charlotte returned. She arrived unannounced, stepping out of a hired carriage in a dress that cost more than most people earned in a year. Her hair was styled in elaborate curls. Her smile was bright and careless. Eliza was in the garden when she saw her. Charlotte walked up the path like she owned it, her heels clicking on the stone. When she reached Eliza, she stopped and tilted her head. "Well," she said lightly, "look at you, playing house." Eliza set down her shears. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see my sister. Is that a crime?" Charlotte's eyes flicked over the garden, the house, the land beyond. "I heard you married him. I have to say I didn't think you had it in you." "You left me no choice." "Oh, Eliza, you always had a choice. You just didn't have the courage to say no." Charlotte laughed. "But I suppose it worked out. You got the ranch, the name, the respectability, all the things you could never have earned on your own." "And what did you get?" Eliza asked quietly. Charlotte's smile faltered, just for a moment. "Freedom." "Is that what you call it?" Before Charlotte could answer, Caleb appeared on the porch. He looked between the two women, his expression darkening. "What's she doing here?" he asked. "Just visiting," Charlotte said sweetly. She turned back to Eliza. "I'll leave you to your gardening. It suits you, digging in the dirt." She walked past Caleb without another word, climbed back into the carriage, and disappeared down the road. Eliza stood in the garden, her hands trembling, and tried very hard not to cry. Caleb came down the steps and stood beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine." "You're not." She turned to him, and the words came out before she could stop them. "Why did you marry me, Caleb? Really?" He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Because you were brave when I was a coward." And for the first time, Eliza thought that maybe, just maybe, this could become something real. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark bedroom staring at the ceiling, Charlotte's words circling through her mind like vultures. All the things you could never have earned on your own. The cruelty of it wasn't in the insult itself. Eliza had heard worse from her sister over the years. It was in the truth buried beneath it. She hadn't earned this. She had simply been there when everything fell apart, willing to be used. She rose before dawn and dressed in the half-light, her fingers moving mechanically over buttons and laces. The house was silent. She made her way downstairs to the study, where the ledgers waited like old friends. Numbers didn't lie, numbers didn't mock. They simply existed, waiting to be understood. She had just opened the latest invoice from the feed supplier when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Caleb appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the day, his hair still damp from washing. He stopped when he saw her. "You're up early," he said. "So are you." He came into the room and stood by the window, looking out at the pale morning sky. "I wanted to talk to you before I left for the south pasture." Eliza set down her pen. "All right. About yesterday. About Charlotte." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I don't want her coming back here." "She's my sister. She's poison." He turned to face her. "And I won't have her treating you that way under my roof." The possessiveness in his voice caught her off guard. Not the possessiveness of ownership, but of protection. It was unfamiliar, unsettling, and something else she couldn't quite name. "She won't come back," Eliza said quietly. "She got what she wanted. She saw that I'm exactly what she expected me to be." "And what's that?" "Small, forgettable. The girl who stayed behind." Caleb crossed the room and sat on the edge of the desk, forcing her to look up at him. "You reorganized this entire ranch in 3 months. You recovered money I didn't even know we'd lost. You wake up before the sun and work until midnight, and you've never once complained." His voice was steady, certain. "There's nothing small about you." Eliza felt something crack open in her chest. She looked down at her hands, willing herself not to cry. "You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because it's true." She met his gaze, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt charged, fragile, like something that could shatter if either of them moved too quickly. Then Caleb stood. "I should go. The fence line won't fix itself." "Caleb." He paused at the door. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, then disappeared into the hallway. She heard the front door open and close, the sound of his boots on the porch, the whinny of his horse as he mounted and rode away. Eliza sat alone in the study, her heart beating too fast, and tried to convince herself that what she was feeling was gratitude and nothing more. She failed. The days grew warmer as spring deepened into early summer. The ranch came alive with the work of the season, calving, branding, mending fences torn apart by winter storms. Eliza watched from the house as the hired men moved across the land, their voices carrying on the wind. She learned their names, their families, their grievances. She adjusted their pay schedules, ensured they had proper equipment, settled disputes before they could fester into something worse. Caleb noticed. "You're good with them," he said one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. "Better than I am." "You're their employer," Eliza said. "I'm just the woman who signs their paychecks." "No, you listen to them. I give orders." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. "My father always said the only thing workers respect is strength. Show weakness, and they'll walk all over you." "Your father says a lot of things." Caleb's mouth quirked. "That he does." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The sky turned gold, then pink, then deepest purple. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, lonely and wild. "Do you miss it?" Caleb asked suddenly. "Miss what?" "Home. Your family." Eliza considered the question. "No," she said finally. "I don't think I ever really had a home. Not the way you mean." "What did you have?" "A place where I was tolerated, where I was useful." She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "It's not the same thing." Caleb turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "And here? What is this?" "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but it's more than I had before." He reached over and took her hand. The gesture was so unexpected that she almost pulled away. But his grip was warm and steady, and she found herself holding on. "I'm glad you're here," he said quietly. "So am I." They sat that way until the stars came out, their hands linked, the night settling around them like a blanket. And for the first time since the wedding, Eliza allowed herself to hope. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Eliza found it on the hall table when she came in from the garden, her hands dirty and her hair escaping its pins. The envelope was heavy, expensive, sealed with red wax. The return address made her stomach drop. Jonathan Ward, Caleb's father. She carried it to the study and set it on the desk, staring at it like it might bite. She knew she should wait for Caleb to come home, let him open it himself. But curiosity and a deep, gnawing dread got the better of her. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Caleb, I have been patient. I have given you time to come to your senses. But it is clear now that you have no intention of correcting your mistake. You married a girl with no breeding, no beauty, and no value to this family. You did it to spite me, and in doing so, you have embarrassed us both. I am writing to inform you that I will be arriving at the ranch next week with my attorney and Judge Harlow. We will be discussing the terms of an annulment. I have already secured the agreement of a more suitable bride, Catherine Langford, daughter of the railroad magnate. She is everything your current wife is not. You will dissolve this marriage, or I will dissolve your inheritance. Half the ranch will revert to me, as per the original agreement we signed when you took over operations. You will be left with nothing. Think carefully about your future. Father Eliza read the letter 3 times, each pass making her hands shake harder. She set it down carefully, as if it might explode, and pressed her palms flat against the desk. He was going to take everything. The ranch, the life they'd built, and Caleb would have to choose his father's approval or a wife he'd never wanted in the first place. She already knew what he would choose, what any sane man would choose. The front door slammed open. Caleb's voice called out, rough with exhaustion. Eliza? She stood smoothing her skirt and walked into the hallway. He stood in the doorway, covered in dust and sweat, his shirt torn at the shoulder. He looked like he'd been wrestling cattle, which, knowing him, he probably had. There you are, he said, relief crossing his face. I thought maybe... He stopped, his eyes narrowing. What's wrong? Nothing. Don't lie to me. She hesitated, then wordlessly handed him the letter. He read it in silence, his expression growing darker with every line. When he finished, he crumpled it in his fist. That son of a... He bit off the curse, his jaw working. He has no right. He has every right, Eliza said quietly. You signed the agreement. He's your father. He's a tyrant. He's also the one holding all the cards. Caleb looked at her, his eyes blazing. You think I should do it? You think I should let him annul the marriage? I think you should do what's best for the ranch. The ranch? He laughed bitterly. Eliza, I don't give a damn about the ranch. Yes, you do. You've given your whole life to it. Because I didn't have anything else. He threw the crumpled letter across the room. I didn't have a choice, or a voice, or a single moment where someone asked me what I wanted. And then you showed up, and suddenly I had something that was mine. Not his. Mine. Eliza's breath caught. Caleb, I'm not annulling this marriage. You'll lose everything. Then I'll lose everything. He crossed the space between them and took her face in his hands, his palms rough and warm against her skin. But I won't lose you. She stared up at him, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Why? Because you see me, he said fiercely. Not the name or the land or the legacy, just me. And I'll be damned if I let him take that away. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, and she kissed him back with everything she'd been holding inside for months. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. We'll figure this out, he said. How? I don't know. But we will. Eliza wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that love could be enough, that wanting something badly enough could make it real. But she had lived too long in the world to trust in happy endings. Still, she nodded. All right. All right. We'll fight. He smiled, really smiled, for the first time since she'd met him. Together? Together. The week passed in a haze of preparation. Eliza threw herself into the ranch records with renewed intensity, searching for anything that might give them leverage. She found discrepancies in the original agreement, clauses that were vague, terms that could be interpreted multiple ways. She documented everything, cross-referenced it with state law, and built a case that was far from perfect, but might be enough. Caleb spent his days riding the property, meeting with the hands, shoring up alliances. He was different now, more focused, more certain. He had always been a good rancher, but now he was something else, a man with something to protect. They worked late into the nights, side by side at the desk, papers spread between them like battle plans. Sometimes their hands would brush as they reached for the same document, and they would pause, fingers tangling, eyes meeting. Those moments stretched longer each time. "I never thought I'd care about contract law," Caleb said one night, rubbing his eyes. "Life is full of surprises." "You're telling me." He leaned back in his chair watching her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you really do it? Offer to marry me?" Eliza set down her pen. She'd known this question would come eventually. She just hadn't expected it to hurt so much to answer. "Because I was tired of being invisible," she said. "My whole life I was the spare daughter, the one who didn't matter. And when Charlotte left, I saw a chance to matter, even if it was just for a moment, even if it was just to save my family from ruin." She met his gaze. "I didn't think about what would come after. I just knew I couldn't go back to being nothing." Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You were never nothing. You didn't know me. I know you now." The tenderness in his voice undid her. She looked away, blinking hard. "Your father is going to destroy us." "Maybe, but at least we'll go down swinging." She laughed despite herself, and he grinned. "There she is," he said softly. "There who is?" "The woman who walked into that church and changed everything." Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I didn't change anything, I just showed up." "Exactly." He stood and came around the desk, pulling her to her feet. For a moment she thought he might kiss her again. But instead, he just held her, his arms solid and sure around her, and she let herself believe, just for that moment, that they might actually survive this. The day Jonathan Ward arrived, the sky was the color of iron. Eliza stood on the porch, watching the carriage roll up the drive. It was black and polished, drawn by matched horses, a symbol of wealth and power that couldn't be ignored. Behind it came two more carriages, one carrying the attorney, the other the judge. Caleb stood beside her, his face carved from stone. "Last chance to run," he said. "I don't run." "I know." He took her hand. "That's why I love you." The words hung in the air between them, stunning in their simplicity. Eliza turned to stare at him. "What did you say?" "I love you." He looked at her fully, his eyes clear and certain. "I should have said it sooner. I wanted to. But I was afraid." "Of what?" "That you'd think I was saying it to keep you here, to manipulate you." He squeezed her hand. "But I don't care anymore. I need you to know. Whatever happens today, I need you to know that I chose this. I chose you." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "Caleb, you don't have to say it back. I just needed to say it." But she did say it, because it was true, and because she was done being afraid. "I love you too." He kissed her, quick and fierce, and then the carriage doors opened and Jonathan Ward stepped out. He looked exactly as Eliza remembered, tall, silver-haired, radiating authority. The attorney was a thin man with spectacles and a leather case. The judge was older, heavy-set, with a face that suggested he'd seen every trick in the book and been unimpressed by all of them. Jonathan climbed the porch steps and stopped in front of Caleb. "Son," he said. "Father, I see you received my letter." "I did." "And yet she's still here." Jonathan's gaze flicked to Eliza with undisguised contempt. "I gave you a week to come to your senses. You've disappointed me." "That's nothing new," Caleb said evenly. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Let's discuss this inside, like civilized people." They moved into the parlor, a room Eliza had carefully prepared, making sure every surface was clean, every detail perfect. She would not give Jonathan Ward any more ammunition than he already had. The attorney opened his case and began laying out documents on the table. The judge took a seat by the window, observing. "The matter is simple," Jonathan began. "This marriage was entered into under false pretenses. The bride was not the woman agreed upon. Therefore, it is void." "The bride was a harper," Caleb countered. The contract specified a union between our families. It said nothing about which daughter. The attorney adjusted his spectacles. Mr. Ward, the intent was clear. Intent and legality are two different things. Eliza spoke for the first time, her voice steady. She placed a document on the table. This is the original agreement. Nowhere does it specify Charlotte Harper by name. It states only that the marriage will be between Caleb Ward and a daughter of the Harper family. I am a daughter of that family. The contract has been fulfilled. Jonathan stared at her like she was an insect that had learned to speak. You think you're clever, he said. I think I can read. Watch your tone, girl. Her name is Eliza, Caleb said sharply, and you'll address her with respect, or this conversation is over. Father and son locked eyes, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The attorney cleared his throat. Even if the contract is technically valid, there are other considerations. Mr. Ward Sr. has concerns about the suitability of the match. The family's reputation is intact, Eliza interrupted. She placed another document on the table. These are the ranch's financial records for the past 3 months. Revenue is up 18%. Operating costs are down 12%. We've renegotiated contracts with 3 major suppliers and recovered nearly $5,000 in fraudulent charges. She looked directly at Jonathan. Your son's ranch has never been more profitable. If you're concerned about the family's reputation, you should be thanking me, not trying to annul our marriage. The judge leaned forward, picking up the financial report. He scanned it, his eyebrows rising. This is impressive, he said. She's competent, Jonathan said dismissively. That doesn't make her suitable. What makes someone suitable? Caleb asked. Beauty? Breeding? Because I've met Catherine Langford. She's beautiful, I'll give you that. She's also spoiled, shallow, and couldn't balance a checkbook if her life depended on it. He gestured to Eliza. This woman saved my ranch. She works harder than anyone I've ever met. She's brilliant and brave, and she stood up in front of 200 people and offered herself as a sacrifice to save her family. His voice rose. So tell me, Father, what exactly makes her unsuitable? She's not one of us. Thank God for that. Jonathan's face flushed red. You ungrateful. I'm done being grateful, Caleb said quietly. I've spent 30 years being grateful. Grateful for the roof over my head. Grateful for the legacy you built. Grateful for every scrap of attention you threw my way. He stood, towering over his father. But I'm not a child anymore. And this ranch is mine. Not yours. Mine. The deed is in my name. The hands answer to me. And if you try to take it, I'll fight you in every court in Texas. You don't have the resources. Actually, he does. Eliza placed one final document on the table. This is a copy of the original deed transfer. When you signed the ranch over to Caleb 5 years ago, you relinquished all legal claim to the property. The clause you referenced in your letter, the one that supposedly gives you the right to reclaim half the ranch, was nullified by an amendment filed 6 months later. She met Jonathan's eyes. An amendment you signed. The room went silent. The attorney snatched up the document, reading frantically. His face went pale. She's right, he said. The clause is void. Jonathan's hands curled into fists. This is a trick. It's the law, the judge said. He stood, gathering the papers. Mr. Ward, I'm sorry, but there's no legal basis for an annulment. The marriage is valid. The property rights are clear. He nodded to Caleb. Congratulations on your union. He left. The attorney followed, looking deeply uncomfortable. Jonathan remained seated, staring at Eliza with something between rage and disbelief. You, he said slowly. You did this. Yes. Oh, you think you've won. I think I've protected what's mine. This ranch will never be yours. You'll always be the replacement, the girl who wasn't good enough to be chosen first. Eliza felt the words hit their mark, felt the old shame rise up, but then Caleb's hand found hers, and she held on tight. You're right, she said. I wasn't chosen first, but I was chosen last. And that's the choice that mattered. Jonathan stood, his movements stiff with fury. He looked at his son. You've made your decision, he said. I have. Then live with it. But don't come crawling back when you realize what you've lost. I won't, Caleb said, because I already know what I've gained. Jonathan turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing through the house. They heard the carriage door slam, the crack of the whip, the sound of wheels on gravel fading into the distance. And then silence. Eliza sagged against Caleb, all the strength draining out of her at once. He caught her, holding her up. "Is it over?" she whispered. "It's over. We won. We won." She started laughing, and then she was crying, and then she couldn't tell the difference. Caleb held her through all of it, his arms steady and sure, and she knew, really knew, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. That night, they stood on the porch as the last light drained from the sky, neither of them quite ready to go inside. The air was thick with the smell of dust and sage, and somewhere in the distance a horse whinnied softly. Caleb's arm was around her shoulders, and Eliza leaned into him, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "I keep expecting him to come back," she said quietly. "He won't. Not tonight, anyway." Caleb's voice was rough with exhaustion. "He needs time to lick his wounds." "Do you think he'll try again?" "Probably, but not the same way. He knows we're watching now." He turned to look at her, his face barely visible in the gathering darkness. "You were incredible in there. The way you stood up to him, I've never seen anyone do that." "I was terrified." "You didn't show it." "Years of practice." She smiled faintly. "When you grow up invisible, you learn to hide everything that matters." He pulled her closer. "You're not invisible anymore." "No," she agreed. "I'm not." They went inside together, and for the first time since their wedding night, Caleb walked her to the bedroom door and didn't immediately turn away. He stood there in the hallway, his hand still holding hers, something unspoken hanging in the air between them. "I meant what I said earlier," he told her, "about loving you." "I know. And I meant what I said about choosing you every time, no matter what." Eliza's throat tightened. "Caleb, I don't expect anything from you," he said quickly. "I know this marriage wasn't what either of us planned, and I know I've been a poor excuse for a husband most of the time, but I want you to know that if you want to stay in this room alone, I understand. I won't push." She looked up at him, at this man who had started as a stranger and become everything, and she made a choice. "I don't want to be alone," she said. His eyes widened. "Eliza, I want you to stay. If you want to." "If I want to?" He laughed, a low, breathless sound. "I've wanted to since the day you reorganized my study and proved you were smarter than half the men in this county." "That's a low bar." "True." He cupped her face in his hands. "But you cleared it by a mile." He kissed her then, soft and searching, and she kissed him back with 6 months of longing compressed into a single moment. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "I'm sure." He picked her up, actually lifted her off her feet, and carried her into the bedroom, kicking the door shut behind them. And for the first time since that terrible wedding day, the room that had been prepared for someone else became theirs. The next morning, Eliza woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the unfamiliar warmth of another person beside her. Caleb was still asleep, one arm thrown across her waist, his face peaceful in a way she'd never seen before. She watched him for a long moment, memorizing the curve of his jaw, the dark lashes against his cheek, the small scar above his left eyebrow that she'd never noticed. This was real. This was hers. She eased out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake him, and dressed in the simple cotton dress she kept for working around the house. Her fingers fumbled over the buttons, clumsy with happiness. She felt different, lighter, like some weight she'd been carrying for years had finally been set down. Downstairs, she made coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching the ranch come to life. The hands were already moving toward the barns, their voices carrying on the morning air. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. A rooster crowed somewhere beyond the corral. "You're up early." She turned to find Caleb in the doorway, barefoot and rumpled, his shirt half-buttoned. He looked younger somehow, softer. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Bad dreams?" "Good ones, actually." She poured him a cup of coffee, and he took it with a smile. "I could get used to this," he said. "What, me making you coffee?" "No, waking up with you in my bed." He set the cup down and pulled her close. "I wasted so much time, Eliza. Months of sleeping in that damn guest room pretending I didn't care." "You were protecting yourself." "From what?" from wanting something you thought you couldn't have. He kissed the top of her head. And now? Now you have it. Now I have you, he corrected, and I'm not letting go. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other and the morning light, until the sound of horses outside reminded them that the world was still turning and there was work to be done. The weeks that followed were the happiest Eliza had ever known. She and Caleb fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing, working side by side during the day, sharing meals and conversation in the evening, falling into bed together at night. The ranch flourished under their combined attention. The cattle were fat and healthy, the fences mended, the books balanced to the penny. But happiness, Eliza was learning, made people careless. She should have known something was wrong when Charlotte's letter arrived. It came on a Thursday, delivered by a writer Eliza didn't recognize. The envelope was wrinkled and stained, as if it had traveled a long way through rough conditions. Charlotte's handwriting on the front was barely legible. Eliza opened it in the study, her stomach already knotting with dread. Eliza, I need your help. I know I have no right to ask, not after everything I've done, but I have nowhere else to turn. He left me. The man I ran away with, he took everything I had and disappeared. I'm stranded in a town called Silver Creek with no money and no way home. The landlady says if I can't pay by the end of the week, she's turning me out. I know you hate me. You should. But please, if you have any mercy in your heart, help me. Just enough for a train ticket. I'll go to Aunt Claire's in Austin. You'll never have to see me again. I'm sorry for everything. Charlotte. Eliza read the letter twice, then set it down and stared at the wall. Part of her, the part that remembered every cruel word, every casual dismissal, every moment of being second best, wanted to throw the letter in the fire and forget she'd ever received it. But Charlotte was still her sister. And despite everything, Eliza couldn't quite bring herself to leave her stranded. She found Caleb in the barn, working on a saddle that had seen better days. He looked up when she entered, his face lighting up in a way that still made her heart skip. Hey, he said, I was just thinking about you. Charlotte wrote to me. His expression darkened immediately. What does she want? Eliza handed him the letter. He read it in silence, his jaw getting tighter with every line. No, he said flatly, handing it back. Absolutely not. Caleb, she made her choice, Eliza. She ran off with some drifter and left you to clean up her mess. Now she wants you to rescue her? He shook his head. No, let her figure it out herself. She's my sister. She's a parasite, and the minute you help her, she'll latch on and bleed you dry. I'm not asking you to like her. I'm just asking you to understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that you have a good heart and she's going to exploit it. He stood, tossing the saddle aside. How much does she want? Just enough for a train ticket to Austin. And you believe her? Eliza hesitated. I don't know. Exactly. He took her hands, his grip firm. Listen to me. I know you want to be the bigger person. I know you want to believe she's changed. But people like Charlotte don't change. They just find new ways to hurt you. Maybe. But I have to try. He studied her face for a long moment, then sighed. You're going to do this no matter what I say, aren't you? Yes. Then I'm coming with you. Caleb, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. His voice softened. You're not doing this alone, Eliza. Not anymore. They left the next morning, taking the wagon instead of horses so they'd have room to bring Charlotte back if necessary. The journey to Silver Creek took most of the day, the road rough and rutted from spring rains. Eliza sat beside Caleb on the bench seat, watching the landscape roll past. Endless grassland dotted with wildflowers, distant mountains purple against the sky. What if she's lying? Eliza asked suddenly. Then we'll know. And if she's not? Then we'll help her, but on our terms. He glanced at her. You're allowed to set boundaries, Eliza, even with family, especially with family. She leaned her head on his shoulder. How did you get so wise? Years of dealing with my father. He smiled grimly. Tyrants make excellent teachers. You learn real fast where the lines are. Silver Creek turned out to be less of a town and more of a hopeful collection of buildings scattered along a dried-up creek bed. There was a saloon, a general store, a livery stable, and a boarding house that looked like it was held together by wishes and determination. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the boarding house and helped Eliza down. "You ready?" he asked. "No, but let's do it anyway." The landlady who answered their knock was a broad woman with iron gray hair and the kind of face that suggested she'd heard every sob story ever invented and believed none of them. "Help you?" she asked. "We're here to see Charlotte Harper," Eliza said. The woman's expression soured. "Room 3, top of the stairs. And if you're here to pay her bill, it's $15. "15?" Caleb's eyebrows shot up. "For what? A month's rent?" 2 weeks, plus damages." "What kind of damages?" "The kind that happen when a girl entertains gentlemen callers at all hours and breaks furniture in the process." The landlady crossed her arms. "She's been nothing but trouble since she got here. Your family?" "I'm her sister," Eliza said quietly. "Then you have my sympathy. Now, do you want the room or not?" Caleb pulled out his wallet and counted out $15. The landlady snatched the bills and jerked her head toward the stairs. "She's all yours." They climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, where the hallway smelled of tobacco and something floral and cloying. Caleb knocked on the door marked with a crooked brass 3. "Go away," Charlotte's voice called from inside. "I told you. I'll have the money tomorrow." "It's Eliza," Eliza said. Silence. Then the sound of footsteps, and the door opened. Charlotte looked terrible. Her hair hung in tangled waves around her shoulders. Her dress was stained and wrinkled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. But what struck Eliza most was the look on her face. Not defiance or mockery, but genuine, bone-deep shame. "You came," Charlotte whispered. "You asked me to." Charlotte's eyes shifted to Caleb, and her expression shuddered. "Both of you." "Both of us," Caleb confirmed. He looked past her into the room, which was small and shabby, the bed unmade and the floor littered with clothes. "Pack your things. We're leaving." I don't have much." "Then it won't take long." Charlotte disappeared back into the room, and Eliza heard the sound of drawers opening and closing. She glanced at Caleb, who stood with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. We still have to get her to Austin." "Caleb, I'm not doing this for her," he said. "I'm doing it for you, because you asked. But that doesn't mean I trust her." Charlotte emerged a few minutes later carrying a worn carpet bag. She looked between them, her face carefully blank. "I'll pay you back," she said. "Every penny, I promise." "We'll talk about it later," Eliza said. "Right now, let's just go." They made it as far as the wagon before Charlotte spoke again. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. "For everything. For leaving. For the things I said. For—" Her voice cracked. "For being such a terrible sister." Eliza turned to look at her. Charlotte's face was streaked with tears, her composure finally crumbling. "I was jealous," Charlotte continued, "of you, of how easy it was for you to just be good, to be the person everyone could count on. I could never do that. I could never be enough." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "So I ran, because running was easier than trying." "And how did that work out for you?" Caleb asked, his tone neutral. "Terribly." Charlotte laughed bitterly. "Turns out there's no outrunning yourself." They rode in silence for a while. The only sound, the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. Eliza sat between Charlotte and Caleb, feeling the tension radiating from both of them. "Why did you do it?" Eliza asked finally. "Why did you leave the night before the wedding?" Charlotte was quiet for so long that Eliza thought she might not answer. Then she said, "Because I looked at the life Father had planned for me, and I saw a cage. A beautiful, gilded cage, but a cage all the same, and I panicked." "So you ran off with a stranger." "He wasn't a stranger, not at first." Charlotte's voice went distant. "He was kind, attentive. He made me feel like I mattered, like I was more than just a pretty face to be bartered away." She paused. "He lied about all of it, of course, but I wanted to believe him so badly that I didn't ask the right questions." "What happened?" Eliza asked. "We got as far as Silver Creek before the money ran out. He said he had work waiting for him, but it was another lie. When I finally figured out what he really was, a con man, a gambler, a thief, I confronted him." She touched her cheek unconsciously. He didn't take it well. Took everything I had and left me with the hotel bill and a black eye. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. Did he hurt you? Eliza asked quietly. Only once. I learned to run after that. Charlotte looked at her sister. I know you have no reason to help me. I know I don't deserve it, but I had nowhere else to go. And despite everything I've done, you're still the only person in the world I trust. Eliza felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. We're taking you to Aunt Clara's, she said. You'll stay there until you figure out what you want to do next. But Charlotte, she waited until her sister met her eyes. This is the last time. If you run again, if you cause trouble, if you hurt people, we're done. Do you understand? Charlotte nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I understand. They stopped for the night at a small inn halfway to Austin, taking 2 rooms, one for Charlotte, one for Eliza and Caleb. Over supper in the dining room, Charlotte picked at her food and said little, her earlier bravado completely gone. She looked young and lost, and Eliza found herself remembering the girl Charlotte had been before the world had taught her that beauty could be currency. After supper, Charlotte excused herself and went upstairs. Eliza and Caleb sat in the nearly empty dining room, nursing cups of coffee that had gone lukewarm. You did a good thing today, Caleb said. Did I? Or did I just enable her to keep making the same mistakes? I don't know. Maybe both. He reached across the table and took her hand. But you did it because you still have hope for her. And that's not a bad thing. Even if it's foolish? Especially then. The world needs more fools like you. She smiled despite herself. That's the worst compliment I've ever received. I have a gift. They sat there a while longer, the warmth of his hand around hers anchoring her. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The world kept turning, indifferent to their small dramas. Do you think she'll change? Eliza asked. Honestly, I don't know. Change is hard, and people don't usually do it unless they have no other choice. He squeezed her hand, but maybe hitting rock bottom was the choice she needed. Maybe this is her chance to build something real. Or maybe she'll run again the first time things get hard. Maybe, but that's not your responsibility. You gave her a lifeline. What she does with it is up to her. Eliza knew he was right, but letting go of the need to fix things, to make everything right, that was harder than she'd expected. They delivered Charlotte to Aunt Clara's house in Austin 2 days later. Clara was their mother's sister, a widow with a sharp tongue and a sharper eye. She took one look at Charlotte and said, Girl, you look like something the cat dragged in and then thought better of. It's good to see you too, Aunt Clara, Charlotte said weakly. Get inside. We'll get some food in you and figure out what to do with you. Clara turned to Eliza. You did right bringing her here, but don't think I'm going to coddle her. She works or she leaves. That's the deal. I think that's exactly what she needs, Eliza said. Charlotte hugged her then, fierce and sudden, and whispered in her ear, Thank you for not giving up on me. Don't make me regret it, Eliza whispered back. They left Charlotte there, standing on Aunt Clara's porch looking small and uncertain, and drove back toward the ranch. Eliza felt lighter somehow, like she'd set down a burden she'd been carrying for years. Do you think I'll ever see her again? She asked Caleb. Probably. People have a way of showing up when you least expect them. Is that optimism or cynicism? Little bit of both. She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her shoulders. They rode like that for miles, the landscape flowing past, the future uncertain but somehow less frightening than it had been. When they finally arrived home, the sun was setting and the ranch was bathed in golden light. Eliza stood in the yard for a moment, just looking at the house, the barn, the endless stretch of land that had become hers in ways that had nothing to do with paperwork or contracts. You all right? Caleb asked. Better than all right, she said. I'm home. He smiled and kissed her, soft and sweet, and they walked inside together, but their peace was short-lived. The trouble started exactly 1 week later, on a Tuesday morning when Eliza was going through the mail. Most of it was routine, bills, correspondence from suppliers, a letter from the Cattle Association. But one envelope stood out. It was thick, official-looking, with a return address from a law firm in Fort Worth. She opened it with a sense of dread that proved entirely justified. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Ward, This firm represents Jonathan Ward in the matter of Ward versus Ward. Please be advised that our client is pursuing legal action to contest the validity of the deed amendment referenced in your previous meeting. New evidence has come to light suggesting the amendment was filed without proper witnesses and may therefore be considered fraudulent. A hearing has been scheduled for 3 weeks from the date of this letter at the District Courthouse in Fort Worth. Your presence is required. Failure to appear will result in a summary judgment in favor of our client. Additionally, our client is seeking damages for emotional distress caused by your refusal to honor the family's wishes regarding appropriate marriage arrangements. The sum requested is $10,000. Please contact this office at your earliest convenience to discuss settlement options. Sincerely, Horace Blackwell, Attorney at Law. Eliza read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking harder with each pass. Then she walked outside to where Caleb was working on the corral fence and handed it to him without a word. His face went from confusion to fury in the space of a heartbeat. "That bastard," he said quietly. "That absolute bastard. Can he do this? Can he actually challenge the deed? If he can prove the amendment wasn't filed correctly, yes." Caleb crumpled the letter in his fist. "And knowing my father, he's already got 3 witnesses lined up to say whatever he needs them to say." "What do we do?" "We fight." He looked at her, his jaw set. "We get a lawyer. We find evidence. We prove that amendment was legal and binding, and then we make damn sure he never comes after us again. And if we can't prove it, then we lose half the ranch and go into debt for the rest of our lives." He pulled her close. "But we don't lose each other. That's the one thing he can't take." Eliza held on to him, feeling the solid warmth of him, and tried to believe it would be enough. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. They hired a lawyer, a woman named Margaret Thorne, who had a reputation for being brilliant, ruthless, and willing to take on the powerful. She was in her 50s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. "Your father-in-law is playing dirty," she told them at their first meeting. "He's claiming the amendment was filed incorrectly, but what he's really doing is trying to exhaust your resources. Legal battles are expensive, and he knows it." "So what do?" Caleb asked. "We find the original filing. We track down the clerk who processed it. We get witnesses who can testify to the validity of the process." Margaret tapped her pen against her notepad. "And we pray that your father didn't manage to buy off everyone in the county clerk's office." "He might have," Caleb said grimly. "Then we find evidence he can't dispute. Financial records, correspondence, anything that proves his intent when he signed that amendment." She looked at Eliza. "You're good with numbers, Mrs. Ward. I'm going to need you to go through every piece of paper in that study and find me something we can use." Eliza spent the next 2 weeks living in the study, surrounded by towers of documents that she'd already organized once and now had to analyze all over again. She found old letters between Caleb and his father, financial statements going back a decade, contracts and agreements that painted a picture of a relationship built on control and obligation. And then, buried in a box at the back of the filing cabinet, she found it. A letter from Jonathan to Caleb, dated 6 months after the deed transfer. In it, Jonathan explicitly acknowledged the amendment and congratulated Caleb on securing full ownership of the ranch. The language was clear, unambiguous, and completely contradicted his current claims. Eliza held the letter with trembling hands and called for Caleb. When he read it, his expression transformed from exhaustion to something like triumph. "This is it," he said. "This is what we need." They brought it to Margaret, who read it twice and then smiled, a sharp, satisfied smile that made Eliza glad the woman was on their side. "This is very good," Margaret said. "With this, we can prove he's lying. He knew about the amendment. He acknowledged it. He can't claim it's fraudulent now without perjuring himself." "Will it be enough?" Eliza asked. "It should be. But we need to be prepared for him to fight anyway. Men like Jonathan Ward don't give up just because the law says they should." The hearing was held on a cold morning in late autumn, the kind of day where the wind cut through your coat and the sky looked like lead. The courthouse was an imposing stone building in the center of Fort Worth, its columns and arches designed to intimidate. Eliza stood on the steps beside Caleb and Margaret, watching people stream inside. "Ready?" Margaret asked. "No," Eliza said honestly. "But let's do it anyway." The courtroom was already half full when they entered. Jonathan sat at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, Horace Blackwell, a thin man with oiled hair and a smile like a knife. When Jonathan saw them, his expression didn't change. He simply stared, cold and implacable. The judge entered, and everyone rose. Judge Harlow, the same judge who had witnessed their confrontation at the ranch, took a seat and surveyed the room with weary eyes. "Let's get this over with," he said. "Mr. Blackwell, you may begin." Blackwell stood and launched into his argument with theatrical precision. The amendment had been improperly filed, he claimed. The witnesses were questionable. The whole transaction had been rushed through without proper oversight. Jonathan Ward, a man of impeccable reputation, had been deceived by his own son and a conniving woman who had wormed her way into the family. Eliza felt her face burn, but she kept her expression neutral. When Blackwell finished, Margaret stood. "Your Honor, the plaintiff's claims are without merit. The amendment was filed according to all legal requirements. The witnesses were legitimate. And furthermore," she held up the letter, "we have evidence that Mr. Jonathan Ward was fully aware of and approved the amendment at the time it was filed." She handed the letter to the judge, who read it in silence. His eyebrows rose. "Mr. Blackwell," he said, "would you care to explain this?" Blackwell took the letter, read it, and his face went pale. He conferred with Jonathan in urgent whispers, but Jonathan's expression remained stony. "Your Honor," Blackwell said finally, "this letter it's taken out of context. It seems pretty clear to me," the judge interrupted. "Your client acknowledged the amendment 6 months after it was filed, in writing, which means he knew it existed and accepted it." He looked at Jonathan. "Do you have an explanation, Mr. Ward?" Jonathan stood slowly. "I signed that letter in good faith, believing my son would use the land responsibly. He has instead allowed himself to be manipulated by a woman of questionable character." "Careful," the judge warned. "Mrs. Ward is not on trial here." "She should be. She's the reason for all of this. She trapped my son into a marriage he never wanted." "That's not true," Caleb said, standing abruptly. "I wanted it. I chose it. And I'll keep choosing it every single day for the rest of my life." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge banged his gavel. "Order, Mr. Ward, the younger Mr. Ward, please sit down." Caleb remained standing. "No, Your Honor. I've spent my whole life sitting down and staying quiet while my father told me who to be and what to want. I'm done with that." He turned to face Jonathan. "You want to know why I married Eliza? Because she's the first person who ever saw me as something other than an extension of you. She saw me as a man who could make his own choices. And I chose her. Not because I had to. Not because it was convenient. But because I love her." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. "And as for the ranch," Caleb continued, "it's mine. Legally, morally, and in every way that matters. You signed it over to me. You acknowledged the amendment. And now you're trying to take it back because you don't like the woman I married." His voice hardened. "But you don't get to do that. You don't get to control me anymore." Jonathan's face had gone purple with rage. "You ungrateful—" "No," Caleb interrupted. "I'm done being grateful for scraps. I'm done living my life according to your plans. And I'm done pretending you're anything other than a tyrant who can't stand the thought of someone telling him no." The judge banged his gavel again. "That's enough. Both of you, sit down." Caleb sat, his chest heaving. Eliza reached over and took his hand, and he gripped it so tightly her fingers went numb. The judge looked at the letter again, then at Jonathan, then at Margaret. "I've heard enough," he said. "The amendment is valid. The deed transfer stands. Mr. Jonathan Ward, your claim is dismissed." He paused. "Furthermore, I'm ordering you to pay the defendant's legal fees. Consider it a penalty for wasting this court's time." The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and it was over. Jonathan stood rigid as stone, his face a mask of fury barely contained. For a long moment he simply stared at his son, and Eliza could see the war happening behind his eyes, the battle between pride and rage, between control and the terrible realization that he had lost. "You'll regret this," he said finally, his voice low and venomous. "Both of you." "We already don't," Caleb replied evenly. Jonathan turned on his heel and strode from the courtroom, Blackwell scrambling to follow. The door slammed behind them with such force that several people in the gallery flinched. Margaret gathered her papers with brisk efficiency. "Well," she said, "that went better than expected." "Better?" Eliza's voice came out higher than intended. He just threatened us in open court. Empty threats. He has no legal recourse left. Margaret snapped her briefcase shut. And even if he tries something outside the law, everyone in this courtroom just witnessed his behavior. The judge was not impressed. Judge Harlow was, in fact, still seated at the bench, watching them with an expression that might have been sympathy. He gestured for them to approach. Mr. and Mrs. Ward, he said quietly when they reached the bench. A word of advice. Jonathan Ward is a proud man, and proud men do foolish things when they've been humiliated publicly. Watch yourselves. Lock your doors. And if he comes near your property, you call the sheriff immediately. Understood? Yes, Your Honor, Caleb said. Thank you. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying with it the smell of rain. Eliza stood on the courthouse steps and tried to convince her hands to stop shaking. They had won. The ranch was theirs. The threat was over. So why did she feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff? Hey! Caleb's hand settled on her shoulders, warm and solid. It's done. We're safe. Are we? Yes. He turned her to face him. He can't touch us now. Not legally, and he's too smart to do anything that would land him in jail. You don't know that. I know him. And I know that underneath all that rage, he's a businessman. He's already calculating his next move, how to save face, how to rebuild his reputation. We're yesterday's problem. He kissed her forehead. Let's go home. They collected the wagon from the livery stable and started the long journey back to the ranch. The sky darkened as they rode, heavy clouds rolling in from the west, and by the time they were halfway home, rain was falling in cold, heavy drops that soaked through their coats and turned the road to mud. Caleb kept his eyes on the horses, guiding them carefully through the deepening muck. Eliza huddled beside him, trying to keep warm, her mind still turning over everything that had happened. The way Jonathan had looked at them, the venom in his voice, the judge's warning echoing in her ears. What if he does try something? She asked over the sound of the rain. Then we'll deal with it. Caleb's jaw was set, his hand steady on the reins. Together. I'm scared. I know, so am I. He glanced at her. But I'm also done living in fear of him, done letting him dictate how I feel, how I live, who I love. He doesn't get that power anymore. When did you get so brave? When I realized I had something worth fighting for. They reached the ranch as darkness fell, the house a warm glow of lamplight in the storm. The hands had already taken care of the evening chores and retired to the bunkhouse, leaving the main house quiet and empty. Caleb unhitched the horses and led them to the barn, while Eliza went inside and lit the lamps, peeling off her wet coat and hanging it by the fire. The house felt different somehow, safer. Like by winning the legal battle, they had claimed it in a way that went deeper than ownership. This was theirs, earned through struggle, defended against those who would take it, built on something stronger than money or tradition. Caleb came in a few minutes later, soaked to the skin, his hair plastered to his forehead. He stood in the doorway dripping onto the floor, and despite everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the weight of the day, Eliza found herself laughing. What? He asked. You look like a drowned cat. I feel like one. He pulled off his boots and left them by the door. I need to get out of these clothes before I catch my death. Go, I'll make us some coffee. She busied herself in the kitchen, grateful for the simple, familiar task. The coffee pot hissed and bubbled on the stove, filling the air with its rich scent. She found bread and cheese in the pantry, sliced them both, and arranged everything on a tray. When Caleb came back downstairs in dry clothes, his hair still damp but combed back from his face, she had everything waiting on the table. They ate in silence at first, both too tired for conversation. But gradually, as warmth returned to their bones and food settled in their stomachs, the events of the day began to feel less overwhelming. You were magnificent today, Eliza said finally. What you said in that courtroom about choosing me, about being done with his control, I've never seen you like that. I meant every word. I know. That's what made it so powerful. She reached across the table and took his hand. I'm proud of you. Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability she'd rarely seen. My whole life, all I ever wanted was for him to be proud of me, to look at me and see someone worthy of the Ward name. He laughed softly, bitterly. Took me 30 years to realize I was chasing something that was never going to happen. He doesn't know how to be proud. He only knows how to control. That's his loss. Maybe, but it still hurts. I know it does. She squeezed his hand. But you have something he'll never have, something he doesn't even understand. What's that? People who love you for who you are, not what you can do for them. He pulled her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. How did I get so lucky? You married the girl nobody wanted. I married the only girl who mattered. They finished their meal and washed the dishes together, falling into the easy rhythm they'd developed over months of shared domesticity. Outside, the storm raged on, wind howling around the corners of the house, rain hammering against the windows. But inside, they were warm and dry and safe. Later, as they lay in bed listening to the storm, Caleb said, I want to make some changes around here. What kind of changes? The guest room, the one I used to sleep in. I want to turn it into something else. A nursery, maybe, or a library, something that's ours, not a reminder of when we were living like strangers. Eliza's breath caught. A nursery? Someday. If you want. He turned to face her in the darkness. I want a future with you, Eliza. Not just surviving or getting by, but actually building something. A family. A life that's ours from the ground up. I want that too, she whispered. More than anything. He pulled her close, and they fell asleep wrapped around each other while the storm spent itself against the windows and the night grew deep around them. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having washed the world clean. Eliza woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the sound of birdsong outside. Caleb was already up. She could hear him moving around downstairs, and she dressed quickly and went to join him. She found him in the study, but he wasn't alone. 3 men stood with him. Ranch hands she recognized, their hats in their hands, their faces serious. What's wrong? She asked immediately. Caleb turned, his expression grim. Someone cut the fence line on the north pasture last night. 20 head of cattle got out. Eliza's stomach dropped. How many did we lose? Don't know yet. Tom and the boys are out rounding them up now. He gestured to the men. These 3 saw something around midnight. Tell her what you told me. The eldest of the 3, a weathered man named Pete, cleared his throat. We were in the bunkhouse, ma'am, getting ready for bed, when we heard horses. 3 riders, maybe 4, moving fast past the north fence. By the time we got outside, they were gone, but we could hear the cattle starting to scatter. Did you see who they were? Too dark, and the rain was coming down hard. But ma'am, he hesitated. One of the horses had a distinctive gait, a limp on the left foreleg. I'd swear it was the same horse I saw Jonathan Ward riding last time he visited. The words hung in the air like smoke. You're sure? Caleb asked. Not courthouse sure, but sure enough. Caleb dismissed the men with thanks and a promise of extra pay for their vigilance. Would it be? Who else has reason to hurt? Would it be? Who else has reason to hurt us? He paced the length of the study, his hands clenching and unclenching. This is exactly what he does. When he can't win legally, he finds other ways to punish people. What do we do? I'm riding into town to see the sheriff. If we can prove it was him, we can't prove it, Caleb. It's too dark, too muddy, too convenient for doubt. She caught his arm. And even if we could, what then? You drag your father into court on charges of vandalism? That makes you look vindictive and him sympathetic. So we just let him get away with it? No, we document everything. We repair the fence, we recover our cattle, and we show him that whatever he does, we're not going anywhere. He wanted to argue. She could see it in his face, but after a moment he nodded reluctantly. Fine, but if he tries something like this again, then we'll deal with it, together, like we always do. Over the next few weeks, they discovered that the cut fence was just the beginning. Supplies went missing from the barn, nothing valuable enough to report, but enough to be noticed. Tools disappeared and reappeared in wrong places. Gates were left open overnight. Small, petty acts of sabotage that couldn't be directly traced to anyone, but added up to a pattern of harassment. The hands were nervous. Several asked if they should be worried about their safety, and Eliza had to reassure them with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. She increased their wages slightly, a gesture of good faith, but also a practical measure to ensure their loyalty during uncertain times. Caleb grew more tense with each incident, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. He doubled the night watch, had the hands patrol in pairs, installed better locks on the barn and equipment sheds. But the harassment continued, always just subtle enough to avoid crossing into criminal territory. Then came the letter. It arrived 3 weeks after the court hearing, delivered by a courier from Fort Worth. The envelope was plain, unmarked, but Eliza's hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message written in careful, anonymous script. You may have won in court, but there are other ways to lose. Ask yourself, how long can you maintain a ranch when no one will do business with you? When your suppliers refuse to deliver? When the bank starts asking uncomfortable questions about your finances? You took something from a powerful man. He will take everything from you in return. This is your last chance. Dissolve the marriage, leave, or watch everything you've built turn to dust. There was no signature. Eliza read it twice, then handed it to Caleb without a word. She watched his face darken as he processed the threat, the implications of it. He's going to try to destroy us economically, Caleb said quietly. Use his influence to cut us off from suppliers, spread rumors, pressure the bank. Can he do that? Probably. He has connections everywhere. If he puts the word out that we're bad risks, people will listen. He crumpled the letter in his fist. We need to move fast, shore up our relationships with suppliers, pay down as much debt as we can, find alternative sources for anything critical. How much time do we have? Not enough. They spent the rest of the day strategizing. Eliza went through the books with ruthless precision, identifying every vulnerability, every dependency, every place where Jonathan could apply pressure. Caleb sent messages to their key suppliers, arranging meetings, feeling out their loyalties. The responses were mixed. Some businesses stood firm, their contracts clear and their integrity intact. But others were evasive, suddenly discovering scheduling conflicts or raising prices without explanation. The pattern was unmistakable. He's already started, Caleb said after reading the third polite refusal in as many days. He's poisoning the well before we even get to drink. Then we find new wells. Eliza, there aren't that many suppliers in this part of Texas, and the ones that exist all know each other. Once word gets around that we're blacklisted, then we go further. We contact suppliers in Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado. We build new relationships. That'll take time. And money. Then we make time. And we use the money we've saved. She met his eyes. We're not giving up. Not after everything we fought for. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do. And I don't deserve you. So we're even. But the situation grew worse before it got better. Within 2 weeks, their primary feed supplier canceled their contract, citing changing business priorities. The bank that held their equipment loan sent a letter requesting an early review of their finances. Two Hands quit abruptly, claiming family emergencies but refusing to meet Caleb's eyes when they collected their final pay. Eliza could feel the pressure building, the walls closing in. She worked 18-hour days, reaching out to new suppliers, renegotiating terms, stretching every dollar as far as it would go. Caleb was no better, driving himself to exhaustion, managing the ranch with a reduced crew and dwindling resources. And through it all, Jonathan remained invisible, a ghost pulling strings from a distance, never appearing in person, never leaving evidence that could be traced back to him. It was Margaret Thorne who finally suggested a solution. She arrived unannounced one afternoon, her buggy pulling up the drive just as Eliza was finishing another round of desperate correspondence. The lawyer climbed down, her face set in determined lines. We need to talk, she said without preamble. They gathered in the study, Eliza, Caleb, and Margaret, and the lawyer laid out her proposal with characteristic bluntness. Jonathan Ward is waging economic warfare. He's using his influence to isolate you, bankrupt you, force you into a position where you have no choice but to capitulate. She paused. But there's a weakness in his strategy. What's that? Caleb asked. Pride. He's doing this personally, which means he's emotionally invested. An emotional investment leads to mistakes. Margaret pulled out a folder. I've been asking questions, discreetly, and I've discovered that Jonathan has been pressuring suppliers by implying that your ranch is in financial trouble, that you're overextended, unreliable, on the verge of collapse. That's slander, Eliza said. Technically, yes, but it's also actionable. Margaret smiled thinly. If we can prove he's deliberately spreading false information to damage your business, we can sue him for defamation and tortious interference, and this time the damages would be substantial. But proving it is easier than you think. I've already spoken to 2 suppliers who were uncomfortable with the pressure they received. They're willing to testify, provided we can guarantee protection from retaliation. She leaned forward. Here's what I propose. We file suit. We make it public. We force Jonathan to defend his actions in open court, where his reputation will be on trial as much as ours. Caleb shook his head. That'll just escalate things. Make him angrier. He's already angry, and he's already escalating. Margaret's voice was firm. The question is, do you want to keep playing defense, or do you want to go on offense? Eliza looked at Caleb, saw the exhaustion in his face, the weight of impossible choices. Then she made a decision. We go on offense, she said. We fight. Eliza, Caleb began. No, I'm done being afraid. I'm done letting him dictate our lives from the shadows. She turned to Margaret. File the suit. Let's drag him into the light and make him answer for what he's done. Margaret nodded approvingly. I'll have the papers ready by tomorrow. After she left, Caleb pulled Eliza into his arms. This is going to get ugly, he said. It's already ugly. At least this way, we're fighting back. I don't want you to have to go through this, to be dragged through court again, to have your name in the papers. My name is already in the papers. As the woman who trapped the ward heir into marriage, remember? She smiled grimly. Let them print the truth for once. The lawsuit hit Fort Worth society like a bomb. Within days, every newspaper in the state was carrying the story. The famous Jonathan Ward, railroad magnate and cattle baron, being sued by his own son for business interference and defamation. The details were scandalous, the implications far-reaching. It wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was a public spectacle. The response was immediate and intense. Some newspapers sided with Jonathan, painting Eliza as a manipulative social climber and Caleb as a wayward son who had betrayed his family. Others took the opposite view, praising their courage and standing up to tyranny, and suggesting that Jonathan's behavior revealed the true nature of his character. The court of public opinion was divided, vicious, and utterly relentless. Eliza tried not to read the papers, but it was impossible to avoid. Every time she went into town, she felt eyes on her, some sympathetic, some condemning, all intensely curious. Conversation stopped when she entered rooms. Whispers followed her down the street. Caleb bore the brunt of it worse. His father's former associates shunned him. Business deals he'd been negotiating fell through. The governor himself sent a tersely worded letter expressing disappointment in the family's public discord. We're pariahs, Caleb said one evening, staring at yet another rejection letter. My father has turned us into pariahs. Good, Eliza replied. Let people see who's really causing the problem. You don't understand. These people, they care more about reputation than truth. And right now, we look like troublemakers. Then we'll be troublemakers with clean consciences and a legal victory. If we win, we'll win. But as the trial date approached, Eliza's confidence began to waver. Margaret had warned them that proving defamation was difficult, that juries were unpredictable, that Jonathan's resources far exceeded their own. They were betting everything on a legal strategy that might not work, against a man who had never lost a fight in his life. The night before the trial, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark beside Caleb, listening to his breathing, feeling the weight of everything they'd risked pressing down on her chest. Caleb? She whispered. Yeah? What if we lose? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Then we start over, somewhere else. Build something new. Just like that? Just like that. He rolled over to face her, his features barely visible in the darkness. I meant what I said in that courtroom. I chose you. And I'll keep choosing you, whether we have a ranch or a shack or nothing but the clothes on our backs. That's very romantic, also terrifying. He laughed softly. Yeah, well, love is terrifying. Is it always like this? This hard? I don't know. This is the first time I've done it. He traced her face with his fingers, gentle and sure. But I know this. I'd rather have 1 year of this, of fighting for something real, than a lifetime of the empty existence I had before you. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, trying to pour all her fear and hope and love into that single gesture. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she whispered, "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." "Together," he agreed. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, people standing in the back, reporters scribbling notes in the front rows. The air buzzed with anticipation, with the hunger for spectacle that only a family drama involving the rich and powerful could provide. Jonathan sat at the defendant's table looking every inch the aggrieved patriarch, silver hair perfectly combed, suit immaculate, expression one of pained dignity. His legal team surrounded him like armor, 3 attorneys in matching dark suits, each carrying briefcases thick with documents. Eliza and Caleb sat with Margaret, who looked small and fierce beside her opponents. A single woman against an army of corporate lawyers. Judge Harlow entered, and the room fell silent. He surveyed the packed courtroom with obvious displeasure. "I want to make something very clear," he said. "This is a court of law, not a theater. I will have order, respect, and decorum. Anyone who disrupts these proceedings will be removed. Are we understood?" A murmur of assent rippled through the crowd. "Good. Let's proceed." Margaret stood and delivered her opening statement with surgical precision. She laid out the case methodically, the pattern of harassment following the first trial, the economic pressure applied to suppliers, the deliberate campaign to destroy their business reputation. She had witnesses, she had documentation, and she had the letter threatening economic destruction. Jonathan's lead attorney, a man named Caldwell with silver at his temples and a voice like honey over gravel, countered with equal skill. His client was a concerned father, he argued, worried about his son's hasty marriage and poor business decisions. Any conversations he'd had with suppliers were merely expressing those concerns, not making threats. The ranch's financial troubles were self-inflicted, the result of inexperience and mismanagement. As for the anonymous letter, anyone could have sent it. There was no proof Jonathan was involved. The first witness was a feed supplier named Marcus Chen, a middle-aged man who ran a family business in Fort Worth. He took the stand nervously, his eyes darting to Jonathan and then away. "Mr. Chen," Margaret began, "did you receive a visit from Jonathan Ward in late October?" "Yes, ma'am." "Can you describe that visit?" "He came to my warehouse, said he wanted to talk about the Ward Ranch account." "What did he say?" Chen swallowed hard. "He said his son had made a foolish marriage and was running the ranch into the ground. That I shouldn't extend them any credit because they were a bad risk. That if I continued doing business with them, I'd lose money and he'd—" He paused. "He'd what, Mr. Chen?" "He'd remember who his friends were when it came time to award contracts." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Margaret let it settle before continuing. "Did you interpret that as a threat?" "Yes, ma'am. I've done business with Jonathan Ward for 15 years. I know what he means when he talks about remembering his friends." Caldwell's cross-examination was brutal. He suggested Chen was biased, that he had a grudge against Jonathan over past business dealings, that he was lying to curry favor with the younger Wards. By the time he finished, Chen looked thoroughly shaken. The second witness fared better, a woman named Sarah Brennan who owned an equipment supply company. She was older, tougher, less easily rattled. When Caldwell tried to intimidate her, she met his gaze steadily and repeated her story without wavering. But it was the third day of testimony that changed everything. Margaret called Eliza to the stand. Eliza walked to the witness box on legs that felt like water, her hands clenched at her sides to keep them from shaking. She was sworn in, took her seat, and forced herself to look at the crowded courtroom. "Mrs. Ward," Margaret began gently, "can you describe for the court what happened after the first trial concluded?" Eliza took a breath and began to speak. She told them about the cut fence, the missing supplies, the suppliers who suddenly refused to do business with them. She described the anonymous letter, the mounting pressure, the way their world had slowly been dismantled piece by piece. "And how did this affect you?" Margaret asked. "It was terrifying. Not just for us, but for our employees. People depend on that ranch for their livelihoods, families, and we were watching it all slip away because one man couldn't accept that his son had made his own choice." Caldwell objected, speculation, emotional appeal, but the judge let her continue. "Mrs. Ward, do you love your husband?" "Yes." "And does he love you?" Yes? Is your marriage real, or was it, as the defense suggests, a mercenary arrangement? Eliza looked directly at Jonathan for the first time. Our marriage became real the moment we chose to fight for it instead of run from it. And it's more real than any arrangement made for land or money or family connections could ever be. When Caldwell cross-examined her, he was merciless. He brought up Charlotte's abandonment, suggested Eliza had trapped Caleb into marriage, implied she was nothing more than a social climber willing to do anything for money and status. Isn't it true, Mrs. Ward, that you only married Caleb Ward to escape poverty? I married him to save my family from ruin. Yes. So you admit it was a mercenary decision? No, it was a desperate one. There's a difference. But you didn't love him when you married him. No, I barely knew him. So this claim of love is convenient, isn't it? Developed after you'd secured the marriage and the ranch? Eliza felt anger flare hot in her chest. Love doesn't always start with romance and roses. Sometimes it starts with two people learning to see each other, to respect each other, to build something together that's stronger than what either of them could have alone. Her voice rose. And yes, I love my husband. I love him for his courage, his integrity, his willingness to stand up to a tyrant even when it costs him everything, which is more than I can say for the man who raised him. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. Caldwell tried to continue, but Eliza had said what she needed to say. When she stepped down, Caleb met her at the gate, took her hand and whispered, "That was perfect. I probably just lost us the case." "No, you just told the truth." The trial lasted another week. Witness after witness, document after document, building a picture of systematic harassment and economic warfare. Jonathan never took the stand. His lawyers were too smart for that, but his presence loomed over every moment. Finally, closing arguments. Margaret spoke with quiet passion about the rule of law, about the right to make one's own choices, about holding powerful men accountable for their actions. Caldwell countered with appeals to tradition, family loyalty, and the dangers of allowing emotion to override wisdom. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, Eliza couldn't breathe. She sat beside Caleb, their hands clasped so tightly her fingers had gone numb, and waited for the verdict that would determine everything. The foreman stood, a weathered rancher with kind eyes and calloused hands. In the matter of Ward versus Ward, on the charge of tortious interference, we find in favor of the plaintiffs. The courtroom exploded into noise. Eliza heard it distantly, through the roaring in her ears. They'd won. They'd actually won. On the charge of defamation, we find in favor of the plaintiffs. Caleb pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face against his chest, shaking with relief and disbelief. Damages are assessed at $15,000, plus legal fees. When she finally looked up, Jonathan was staring at them across the courtroom. His face was ashen, his eyes burning with a fury so intense it was almost physical. But underneath the rage, she saw something else, something that looked almost like defeat. He stood, pushed past his lawyers, and walked out of the courtroom without a word. Outside, the reporters swarmed them, shouting questions, demanding comments. But Margaret guided them through the crowd with practiced efficiency, bundling them into a waiting carriage before anyone could get too close. As they pulled away from the courthouse, Eliza finally let herself cry, great shaking sobs of relief and exhaustion and overwhelming emotion. Caleb held her through it all, his own eyes wet, neither of them speaking because there was nothing that needed to be said. They had fought for their marriage, their home, their future, and they had won. The victory felt strange in its aftermath. Eliza had expected relief, perhaps even jubilation, but what she felt instead was a bone-deep exhaustion mixed with something that felt uncomfortably like guilt. She and Caleb rode home in silence, the carriage wheels churning through mud still soft from recent rains, and she couldn't shake the image of Jonathan's face as he'd walked out of that courtroom, a proud man brought low by his own son. "Stop," Caleb said quietly. She turned to look at him. "Stop what?" "Feeling sorry for him. I can see it on your face." "I don't—" She stopped. "Maybe I do. A little. Is that wrong?" "No, it's who you are." He took her hand. "But don't forget what he tried to do to us. Don't let compassion turn into doubt." "I know what he did. I just—" She struggled for the words. "He's still your father, Caleb. And we just destroyed him in the most public way possible. He destroyed himself. We just made sure everyone could see it. She knew he was right. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things, and the weight of what they'd done sat heavy on her chest. They arrived home as the sun was setting, the sky painted in shades of orange and gold that turned the ranch into something out of a painting. The hands were finishing evening chores, their voices carrying across the yard in easy conversation. Everything looked normal, peaceful, as if the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. Inside, the house felt empty and too quiet. Eliza moved through the rooms, lighting lamps, while Caleb built up the fire, both of them going through familiar motions while their minds were elsewhere. "I should make supper," Eliza said finally. "I'm not hungry." "Neither am I, but we should eat something." They ended up sitting at the kitchen table with bread and cheese neither of them touched, watching the fire burn low in the grate. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable exactly, but loaded with unspoken thoughts. "What happens now?" Eliza asked. "We rebuild. We contact the suppliers who cut us off and let them know the verdict. We pay down our debts with the settlement money. We hire back the hands we lost." He paused. "We move forward." "And your father?" "I don't know. I suppose that depends on him." They went to bed early, both exhausted from weeks of tension finally released, but sleep didn't come easily. Eliza lay awake in the darkness, listening to Caleb's breathing beside her, and wondered what tomorrow would bring. They had won the battle, but at what cost? And was the war truly over, or had they just entered a new phase? She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to bright morning sunlight and the smell of coffee. She found Caleb already dressed, standing at the kitchen window with a cup in his hand, staring out at something in the distance. "What is it?" she asked. He gestured toward the drive. "We have a visitor." Eliza's heart stuttered. She moved to the window and looked out. A single horse stood tied to the porch rail, a bay gelding with a distinctive white blaze. She recognized it immediately. Jonathan's horse. "He's here?" Her voice came out higher than she intended. "In the study. He arrived about 20 minutes ago. Asked to speak with me." Caleb set down his cup. "I told him to wait." "What does he want?" "I don't know, but I'm about to find out." He turned to her. "You don't have to be there. This is between me and him." "No, whatever he has to say, we hear it together." They walked to the study hand in hand, and Eliza felt her pulse hammering in her throat. Whatever came next, rage, recrimination, threats, they would face it the same way they'd faced everything else. Jonathan stood by the window, his back to the door. He was dressed simply for once, no expensive suit or polished boots, just work clothes that had seen better days. His shoulders were hunched, and when he turned at the sound of their footsteps, Eliza was shocked by how much older he looked. The fury that had animated him in the courtroom was gone, replaced by something that looked like weariness. "Father?" Caleb said neutrally. "Son." Jonathan's gaze flicked to Eliza, then away. "Mrs. Ward." "Mr. Ward." An awkward silence fell. Jonathan cleared his throat, a harsh sound in the quiet room. "I came to—" He stopped, started again. "I owe you an apology." The words hung in the air like something fragile. Eliza felt Caleb's hand tighten around hers. "Go on," Caleb said carefully. "What I did was wrong. The harassment, the threats, the business interference, all of it." Jonathan's voice was rough, stripped of its usual commanding tone. "I told myself I was protecting you, protecting the family name. But the truth is, I was trying to control you, like I've always tried to control you." "Yes," Caleb said, "you were. And when you finally stood up to me, when you chose her," he looked at Eliza again, really looked at her this time. "I couldn't accept it, couldn't accept that my son had become his own man, capable of making his own choices." He exhaled slowly. "So I tried to break you, to punish you for defying me, and in doing so, I broke something I can never repair." "What's that?" Caleb asked. "Your trust, your respect, whatever love you might have still had for me." Jonathan's hands curled into fists at his sides. "I've spent my whole life building things, empires, legacies, dynasties, but I never learned how to build a relationship with my own son, and now it's too late." "Is it?" Caleb's voice was quiet. An apology? That's what you came here to give me? I came here to tell you the truth. What you do with it is up to you. Caleb released Eliza's hand and walked to the desk, putting distance between himself and his father. When he spoke, his voice was measured, controlled. My whole life. I did what you wanted. I learned the business. I took over the ranch. I was going to marry a woman I didn't love because you told me it was the right thing to do. He turned to face Jonathan. And then Eliza walked into that church. And for the first time, I saw a different path. A choice that was mine and mine alone. Do you know what that felt like? No, Jonathan said quietly. It felt like freedom. Terrifying, exhilarating freedom. Caleb's jaw tightened. And you tried to take it away from me. Not just once, but over and over again. You sued me. You sabotaged my business. You threatened my wife. You did everything in your power to force me back into the cage you'd built for me. I know. Do you? Do you really understand what you did? Jonathan was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I was afraid. Of what? Of losing you completely. Of watching you walk away and build a life that had nothing to do with me. Of becoming irrelevant. He laughed bitterly. Ironic, isn't it? The thing I was afraid of, I caused by trying to prevent it. Eliza watched Caleb's face, saw the emotions warring there. Anger, pain, something that might have been pity. She wanted to speak, to offer comfort or guidance. But this was his moment, his choice. Finally, Caleb said, What do you want from me, Father? Nothing. I don't deserve anything from you. Jonathan straightened his shoulders with visible effort. I just wanted you to know that I see what I did. I see how wrong I was. And I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't undo the damage. I know. It doesn't repair the relationships you destroyed or fix the businesses you hurt. I know that too. Then why are you here? Jonathan met his son's eyes. Because you deserve to hear it. Because I spent so many years telling you what to do and what to think that I never once told you I was proud of you. And I am. Proud of the man you've become. Proud of the courage it took to stand up to me. Proud of the life you're building with your wife. His voice cracked slightly. I just wish I'd told you sooner. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. Beside her, Caleb's jaw worked, his hands clenched at his sides. I don't know if I can forgive you, Caleb said finally. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I understand. But he stopped, searching for words. I don't want to spend the rest of my life hating you either. That's just another kind of cage. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe, someday, if you can prove that this apology is real, if you can show me through actions, not words, that you've changed, maybe we can find a way forward, not the relationship we had before, something different, something honest. Jonathan nodded slowly. I'd like that, if you'll give me the chance. I'm not promising anything. I'm not asking for promises, just possibility. They stood there, father and son, separated by years of hurt and misunderstanding, and Eliza saw something shift in the space between them. Not reconciliation, not yet, but maybe the first fragile step toward it. There's something else, Jonathan said. The settlement money, the $15,000. I want you to keep it. That was court-ordered. I don't care. Use it to rebuild what I damaged. Consider it, he struggled for the right word. Consider it an investment in your future, the future I should have supported from the beginning. Caleb stared at his father for a long moment. Then he said, Thank you. Jonathan nodded once, sharp and military, then turned to leave. But at the door, he stopped and looked back at Eliza. Mrs. Ward, he said, I was wrong about you, completely wrong. You're exactly what my son needed, what this family needed. I'm sorry for how I treated you. Eliza's throat tightened. Thank you, Mr. Ward. He left, and they heard his boots on the porch, the creak of leather as he mounted his horse, the slow clop of hooves fading down the drive. Eliza and Caleb stood in the study, neither speaking, processing what had just happened. Finally, Caleb sank into the desk chair and put his head in his hands. Are you all right? Eliza asked softly. I don't know. I didn't expect... He looked up at her. Did that really just happen? I think so. He apologized. He did. My father. The man who's never admitted being wrong about anything in his entire life. He apologized. Eliza moved to him, running her fingers through his hair. How do you feel? Confused, angry, relieved, sad. He pulled her onto his lap, holding her close. All of it at once. That seems reasonable. Do you think he meant it, the apology? I think he meant it when he said it. Whether he can follow through, she shrugged. Time will tell. And if he can't, if this is just another manipulation, then we'll deal with it. Together. Like we always do. He kissed her then, soft and grateful, and she felt some of the tension drain from his body. I love you, he whispered against her lips. I love you too. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other in the quiet study, letting the morning sun warm them through the windows. Outside, the ranch was coming to life, the sounds of cattle lowing, horses whinnying, men calling to each other as they went about their work. Life continuing, constant, and reassuring. Eventually, they had to move. There was work to be done, always work to be done on a ranch. But something had shifted. The weight that had been pressing down on them for months had lifted, and in its place was something lighter. Hope, maybe. Or just the simple peace of knowing they had survived. Over the next few weeks, they threw themselves into rebuilding. With the settlement money and Jonathan's additional contribution, they paid off their debts, restocked supplies, and hired back the hands who had left. Word of the trial verdict spread, and suddenly suppliers who had turned them away were eager to do business again. The tide had turned in their favor. Eliza found herself working alongside the hands more often, learning the rhythms of ranch life beyond the study. She learned to mend fence, to recognize the signs of illness in cattle, to judge the quality of hay by its color and smell. Her hands developed calluses, her skin tanned, and she felt herself becoming part of the land in a way she never had before. Caleb noticed the change. You're happy, he said one evening as they walked the property together, checking the new fence line. I am, she agreed. I never thought I would be. Not like this. Like what? Working. Building something with my own hands. Belonging somewhere not because I have to, but because I choose to. She stopped and turned to face him, the setting sun painting everything gold. I spent my whole life being told I wasn't enough, not pretty enough, not charming enough, not worthy of being chosen first. And then you chose me. Not because I was the only option, but because you wanted to, and that changed everything. You changed everything, he corrected. You walked into that church and saved my life. Not just from a marriage I didn't want, but from a future where I would have spent every day pretending to be happy. You gave me permission to want more, to be more. We saved each other. Yeah, I guess we did. They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, and Eliza felt a completeness she'd never known existed. This was what it meant to be chosen, not for what you could offer or how you could serve, but for who you were in your deepest, truest self. A month after the trial, a letter arrived from Austin. Eliza recognized Charlotte's handwriting and opened it with equal parts curiosity and caution. The letter was short, written in a hand that was steadier than before. Eliza, I wanted you to know I've found work at Aunt Clara's boarding house. Real work. Cooking, cleaning, managing the books. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. And for the first time in my life, I'm proud of what I'm doing. Aunt Clara is teaching me to sew. She says I have good hands for detail work. Maybe someday I'll be able to make my own living that way. I think about you often, about the grace you showed me when you had every right to turn me away. I don't deserve a sister like you, but I'm grateful I have one. I hope you and Caleb are happy. I hope you've built the life you deserve. With love, Charlotte Eliza read the letter twice, then tucked it into her desk drawer. She would write back eventually. But for now, it was enough to know that Charlotte was finding her own path, learning to stand on her own feet. Some stories didn't need tidy resolutions, just the promise of growth. Spring turned to summer, and the ranch flourished. The cattle grew fat on good grass. The foals born that season were healthy and strong, and the financial ledgers showed consistent profit for the first time in years. Eliza hired a young woman from town to help with the household accounts, a sharp-eyed girl named Mary who reminded her of herself at that age, hungry for opportunity, eager to prove her worth. You're good at this. Eliza told her after a particularly complicated week of bookkeeping. Have you thought about studying accounting formally? Mary's eyes widened. Women can't be accountants, ma'am. Says who? Well, everyone, I suppose. Everyone is wrong about a lot of things. Eliza smiled. I'll make you a deal. You work here for a year, learn everything I can teach you, and I'll write you a letter of recommendation to any business school that will accept you. And if they won't accept you because you're a woman, we'll start our own accounting firm and prove them all wrong. Mary stared at her like she'd sprouted wings. You mean it? I never say things I don't mean. The girl's face transformed with hope, and Eliza felt something warm bloom in her chest. This was how you changed the world. Not through grand gestures, but through small acts of faith in people who had been told they weren't enough. In late summer, Jonathan sent a letter. It was formal, carefully worded, but genuine in its tone. He was in Denver on business and wanted to know if he could visit the ranch on his way home. Not to interfere, the letter emphasized, but simply to see what they had built, to try to understand the life his son had chosen. Eliza watched Caleb read the letter, saw the conflict play across his face. What do you want to do? She asked. I don't know. Part of me wants to tell him no, to keep him at a distance where he can't hurt us again. And the other part? Wants to believe he's changed, that we can have something better than what we had before. He looked at her. What do you think? I think people deserve second chances, but they have to earn them. She took his hand. If you want to invite him, I'll support you. But we set the terms. Clear boundaries about what's acceptable and what's not. Caleb nodded slowly. All right. He can come, but just for a day. And if he starts any of his old behavior, we throw him out on his ear. Exactly. Jonathan arrived on a clear September morning, riding alone on the same bay gelding he'd had before. He looked different, thinner, his face lined with fatigue, but something in his eyes was softer than Eliza remembered. Caleb met him at the porch, and the two men shook hands with careful formality. Then Jonathan turned to Eliza. Mrs. Ward, thank you for allowing me to visit. Mr. Ward, she said evenly, welcome to our home. They gave him a tour of the ranch, showing him the improvements they'd made, the systems Eliza had put in place, the plans they had for expansion. Jonathan listened without interrupting, asked thoughtful questions, and offered no unsolicited advice. It was so unlike him that Eliza kept waiting for the mask to slip, for the controlling patriarch to emerge. But he remained respectful, almost deferential throughout the day. Over supper, a simple meal of roast chicken and vegetables from Eliza's garden, Jonathan said, You've built something remarkable here, both of you. It's not what I would have done, but that's the point, isn't it? It's yours, not mine. It is, Caleb agreed. I'm proud of you, son. I should have said that more. I should have... He stopped, gathering his thoughts. I should have trusted you to find your own way instead of trying to force you down the path I chose. Yes, Caleb said quietly. You should have. I can't undo the past, but I can try to be better going forward, if you'll let me. Caleb looked at Eliza, and she gave him a small nod. This was his decision to make, his relationship to define. We can try, Caleb said, slowly, with clear boundaries. But we can try. Jonathan's shoulders sagged with visible relief. That's all I ask. After supper, Jonathan prepared to leave, mounting his horse in the fading light. But before he rode away, he turned to Eliza. Mrs. Ward, may I speak with you privately for a moment? She glanced at Caleb, who nodded, then walked over to where Jonathan sat on his horse. I wanted to thank you, Jonathan said quietly, for being patient with an old fool, for giving my son the courage to become his own man, he paused, for being exactly what this family needed, even when we were too blind to see it. I didn't do it for the family, Eliza said. I did it for Caleb and for myself. I know. That's what makes it genuine. He gathered his reins. Take care of him and let him take care of you. That's what marriage should be. Two people choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. We will. He rode away into the gathering dusk, and Eliza stood watching until he disappeared over the hill. When she turned back, Caleb was waiting on the porch, silhouetted against the lamplight from inside. You all right? He asked when she reached him. Better than all right. She took his hand. I think he really is trying. Time will tell. It always does. They went inside together, and as Eliza moved through the evening routine, cleaning dishes, banking the fire, preparing for bed, she felt a sense of completeness that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with acceptance. This was her life. These were her choices. And she had built something real from the ashes of what could have been a disaster. That night, as they lay in bed, Caleb said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about turning the guest room into something new." "Oh? I want to make it a nursery." Eliza's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I want a family with you, Eliza. Children who grow up knowing they're loved for who they are, not what they can achieve. Who learn that it's okay to make their own choices, even when those choices are hard." "That sounds perfect." "Yeah." He pulled her closer, his hand settling on her stomach. "You want that too?" "More than anything." They made love that night with a tenderness that felt like promise, like the beginning of something new. And when Eliza finally fell asleep, wrapped in Caleb's arms, she dreamed of a future filled with laughter and children's voices, and the kind of love that wasn't given conditionally but freely, without reservation. The seasons turned. Autumn came with its harvest, winter with its rest, and by the time spring arrived again, Eliza was carrying their first child. She worked as long as she could, managing the books and the household with Mary's help, but eventually her body demanded rest. Caleb fussed over her constantly, bringing her tea and pillows and books, until she finally had to tell him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she said with exasperation. "I know, I worry." "I know you do, but I'm strong. We both are." The nursery was finished by April, painted a soft yellow that caught the morning light. Caleb had built a crib himself, sanding it until the wood was smooth as silk, and Eliza had sewn quilts and curtains in colors that reminded her of wildflowers. On a warm May morning, their daughter was born. She came into the world screaming, red-faced and furious, and when the midwife placed her in Eliza's arms, everything else fell away. This was what it meant to be chosen, not just by another person, but by life itself, to be trusted with something precious and perfect and entirely new. "She's beautiful," Caleb whispered, his eyes wet. "She looks like you." "She looks like us." They named her Rose, after the wildflowers that grew on the hillside behind the house. Rose Catherine Ward, a name that belonged only to her, with no expectations or family history attached. Jonathan arrived 3 days later, arriving unannounced in the middle of the afternoon. But instead of striding in as he once would have, he waited on the porch until Caleb invited him inside. When he saw the baby, something in his face crumbled. He stood frozen in the doorway, staring at his granddaughter with an expression Eliza had never seen before. Wonder, regret, hope, all mixed together. "May I—" His voice cracked. "May I hold her?" Eliza looked at Caleb, who nodded. She placed Rose carefully in Jonathan's arms, watching as the old man's hands, which had built empires and crushed rivals, cradled the tiny infant with infinite gentleness. "Hello, little one," Jonathan whispered. "I'm your grandfather, and I'm going to do better by you than I did by your father. That's a promise." Tears tracked down his weathered cheeks, and he made no attempt to hide them. Caleb moved to stand beside his father, placing a hand on the older man's shoulder. "Her middle name is Catherine, after your mother." Jonathan looked up sharply, his eyes swimming. We wanted her to have a connection to the family, the good parts of it." "Thank you," Jonathan said roughly. "That means thank you." He stayed for an hour holding Rose, asking tentative questions about the birth and Eliza's health, offering quiet congratulations. When he left, he shook Caleb's hand and thanked Eliza for her generosity, and there was a humility in him that felt genuine. After he'd gone, Eliza settled into the rocking chair with Rose, nursing her while Caleb sat on the floor beside them, one hand resting on Eliza's knee. "Do you think he'll keep his promise?" Caleb asked. "About doing better?" "I think he'll try, and maybe that's enough. You're more forgiving than I am." "No, I'm just practical. Holding on to anger takes energy I'd rather spend on other things." She looked down at Rose's tiny face, perfect and peaceful. "Like this. Like us. Like building the life we want instead of fighting against the one we don't." Caleb reached up and took her free hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. How did I get so lucky? You didn't get lucky. You made a choice. In that church, in that courtroom, every day since, you chose us. Best choice I ever made. Rose finished nursing and fell asleep in Eliza's arms. Her small fist curled against her mother's chest. Eliza felt the weight of her, the warm solidity, and thought about all the paths that had led to this moment. Charlotte's abandonment, the wedding that should have been a disaster, the legal battles and the harassment and the slow, painful process of building something real from the wreckage of other people's plans. If someone had told her a year ago that she would be sitting here in a house she owned, with a husband she loved and a daughter she adored, she would have laughed at the impossibility of it. But here she was, and it was real. Summer arrived in full force, turning the grasslands golden and the sky impossibly blue. Eliza recovered her strength and returned to managing the ranch accounts, now with Rose sleeping in a basket beside the desk. Mary proved herself invaluable, taking on more responsibilities and showing a natural gift for numbers that made Eliza's promise to help her pursue education feel less like charity and more like necessity. Jonathan visited once a month, always respectfully, always with notice. He brought gifts for Rose, a silver rattle, a hand-carved wooden horse, a quilt sewn by his late mother that he'd kept in storage for decades. He was trying, genuinely trying, to be the grandfather he'd never been as a father. Charlotte wrote regularly now, her letters full of news about her work at the boarding house and the sewing business she was building on the side. She sent a christening gown for Rose, made with such delicate stitching that Eliza could see her sister's talent beginning to flower. The accompanying note said simply, "For my niece. May she grow up knowing she's loved." On a warm August evening, Eliza and Caleb sat on the porch after supper, Rose asleep in her cradle beside them. The sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed contentedly. "Do you ever think about that day?" Caleb asked. "The wedding?" "Sometimes. It feels like a lifetime ago." "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Eliza considered the question seriously. The fear, the humiliation, the months of uncertainty, all of it had been real and painful. But it had also led her here, to this porch, this man, this life. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. I wouldn't choose to go through it again, but I wouldn't trade where it brought me for anything. Even when things were terrible? When we were barely speaking, when my father was trying to destroy us? Even then. Because those hard things taught us how to fight for each other, how to choose each other when it would have been easier to walk away." She turned to look at him. "Love isn't about perfect beginnings, Caleb. It's about what you build together after the beginning ends." He pulled her close, and they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Rose stirred in her cradle, making small sounds of contentment, and Eliza felt her heart swell with a happiness so complete it almost hurt. "I have something for you," Caleb said suddenly. He stood and disappeared inside, returning a moment later with a small wooden box. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a ring. Not the plain gold band she'd worn since the wedding, but something new, a silver band set with a small blue stone that caught the fading light. "It's sapphire," Caleb said. "Your birthstone. I had it made in town." He took the ring from the box and held it up. "The first ring I gave you was obligation. This one is choice. Will you wear it?" Eliza's throat tightened with emotion. "Yes." He slipped it onto her finger next to the gold band and kissed her hand. "I love you, Eliza Ward. Not because I have to, not because it's expected, but because you're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I choose you. Every single day I choose you." "I choose you too," she whispered. "Every day, for the rest of my life." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, and in that moment, Eliza understood something profound. She hadn't been chosen first. She'd been chosen last, after all the easy options were gone, after the safe path disappeared. But being chosen last meant being chosen with full knowledge, with open eyes, with complete understanding of what was being accepted and what was being risked. It meant being chosen not despite her flaws, but including them. Not as a substitute or a consolation, but as exactly who she was. And that, she realized, was the truest kind of love there was. The years that followed were not without their challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, losses and setbacks that tested their resolve. Jonathan's health declined slowly, and though he never regained the towering presence he'd once had, he found a gentler way of being, a grandfather who told stories and carved toys and admitted when he was wrong. Charlotte eventually married a kind man who owned a haberdashery in Austin, and she and Eliza developed a relationship built on honesty rather than rivalry. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. Mary went on to become the first female graduate of a prestigious business school in Chicago, funded partly by a scholarship and partly by Eliza and Caleb's continued support. She returned to Texas and opened an accounting firm that specialized in helping women-owned businesses, and she never forgot the woman who had first told her she was capable of more. Rose grew into a bright, curious child who followed her father around the ranch and helped her mother with the books, learning early that she could be whatever she chose to be. 2 more children followed, a boy they named James and another girl they called Clara, after the aunt who had given Charlotte a second chance. And through it all, Eliza and Caleb chose each other. On easy days and hard ones, through triumph and failure, in sickness and health. They chose to see each other, to fight for each other, to build a life together that was theirs alone. On their 10th anniversary, they stood together in the same church where they'd been married, renewing vows they'd actually meant this time. The pews were filled with friends and employees and people whose lives they'd touched. Charlotte was there with her husband. Jonathan sat in the front row holding his granddaughter's hand, and Mary stood as Eliza's witness. When the preacher asked if they took each other as husband and wife, both of them answered without hesitation. "I do. I do." And this time when Caleb kissed his wife, the church erupted in genuine celebration, because everyone there understood what they had witnessed, not a business arrangement or a social necessity, but a love that had been tested in fire and emerged stronger for it. That night, back at the ranch, Eliza stood in the doorway of the master bedroom and looked at the room that had once been decorated for someone else. The rose petals and champagne were long gone, replaced by their life together. Children's drawings on the walls, books stacked on the nightstand, a quilt sewn from scraps of their favorite clothes draped across the bed. "You're thinking too much again," Caleb said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I'm thinking about how far we've come." From strangers to this? From people who were chosen for us to people who chose each other. She leaned back against him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Charlotte hadn't run away?" "Sometimes, but not often." "Why not?" "Because wondering about other paths is a waste of time when the one you're on is exactly where you're meant to be." He turned her to face him. "You were never my second choice, Eliza. You were my choice, the only one that mattered." She kissed him then, soft and deep, and let herself feel the truth of it. She hadn't been wanted first, but she'd been chosen with intention. And in the end, that was worth more than any arranged marriage or strategic alliance could ever be. They made love that night with the windows open, the smell of sage and wildflowers drifting in on the breeze, and afterward, lying wrapped in each other's arms, Eliza thought about the girl she'd been, the overlooked daughter, the replacement bride, the woman who'd been told she wasn't enough. That girl was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who knew her worth, someone who had learned that being chosen didn't make you valuable. You were valuable already, and the right person would see it. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Caleb's voice was sleepy, content. "For seeing me, for choosing me, for building this life with me. Thank you for letting me, for being brave enough to stand in that church and save us both." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, and when morning came, they woke to the sound of their children laughing in the yard and the promise of another day to choose each other all over again. Because in the end, that was what love was. Not a single moment of decision, but 1,000 small choices made every day. The choice to stay when leaving would be easier. The choice to forgive when anger would be justified. The choice to see this person in front of you, truly see them, and love them anyway. Eliza Ward had been the replacement bride, the girl nobody wanted, but she had become the woman who built an empire from the wreckage of someone else's escape, the wife who fought for her marriage in courtrooms and kitchens and quiet moments in the dark, the mother who raised children to know they were enough exactly as they were. And she had done it all by making one simple choice, over and over again. To show up, to stay, to love with everything she had, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. That, she had learned, was the secret. Not perfection, but perseverance. Not being chosen first, but being chosen truly. Not a love that came easily, but a love that was fought for, earned, and cherished every single day. And as she stood at the window that morning, watching Caleb chase their children through the wildflowers while the sun rose over the ranch they'd built together, Eliza Ward knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was exactly where she was meant to be.